Bob has made several references to the improvements in the hurricane protection system and the fact that when this storm comes on shore, wherever it happens, on this August 29th, we'll be in a lot better position than we were on August 29th of 2005. So the green line here is the New Orleans, what the Corps would call risk reduction system, but the hurricane protection system. And one of the interesting things about this is that essentially this green line over here didn't exist 7 years ago. One of the ironies of Katrina is that it gave the West Bank its first true hurricane protection system. This is the Harvey Canal here. The Intracoastal Canal comes down this way on the West Bank, and here's this V. So we always talk about the Mr. Go, the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet on the East Bank. This was the West Bank's Mr. Go, the idea that a massive storm surge could move up the West Bank through these waterways, the navigable waterways, and dump just enormous amounts of water on really both sides of the Harvey Canal. But there was nothing on this side of the Harvey Canal to protect anybody. We now have, in addition to levees, the world's largest drainage pumping station at this intersection above Lafitte, so it causes some concerns for Lafitte, but it will drain this basin even over into Plaquemines Parish. When they close this gate, this giant sector gate that's at this V here, and then start up this pumping station. One little weak link is over here at the west tie-in, they call it, where the river levee meets up with the levee for the hurricane system. They're not quite done with that. The Corps says they can put in those big HESCO baskets, those Volkswagen-sized sandbags, essentially, and they can provide the storm protection, the 100-year storm protection that this whole system is based on. Now let's shift attention over to the East Bank, because we've made references a couple of times to some of the improvements there. This is the notorious Mississippi River Gulf Outlet, the Mr. Go, which is now closed in kind of two places, really. Down here there's a big rock barrier that goes across it, and then this line here represents a 2-mile, we've nicknamed it the Great Wall of New Orleans or St. Bernard, a massive 26-foot high wall that protects the city of New Orleans. And you can actually see it if you've ever taken the bridge on the 510 over to Chalmette. If you look off to the east, it's big enough. You can see it. I flew into New Orleans the other day from Miami and happened to glance down, and there it was. It is truly one of the remarkable engineering achievements in the history of the Corps, and the largest design-build project on a civil engineering basis in the entire history of the Corps of Engineers. So let's come back out to the map for just a minute and talk about the fact that that has closed in one of these routes. This did not exist. So you had this funnel effect. Now remember, the other thing about New Orleans, if you ever think about Plaquemines Parish and St. Bernard, you have kind of a natural V that forms anyway with the levees. So at the Corps of Engineers research facility in Vicksburg, Mississippi, they pointed out one day on one of the field trips we took up there, Don Rizio, their sort of chief modeler, who has now retired, I believe, but he pointed out that there was this sort of natural V shape to the levee anyway. So the coastline tends to bring in water. It's just like a funnel. Man made that worse by building one waterway here with some levees and another waterway here with some levees, and this natural surge that tends to come in and pile up anyway was like driving water through a funnel. So you had what has been nicknamed, you'll hear it a lot in news stories, this super highway for a hurricane, and that's what happened. You had this massive amount of water that went into New Orleans East, down here in Chalmette and Miro. These used to be cypress swamps. They're now open areas of water where there just wasn't anything there anymore to stop the water. Now that's one aspect of this. This is a concrete levee that runs out to the Bayou Sauvage Refuge. As you're coming in from Slidell, you go over a little hill. This is the levee you're going over, and then the levee runs all the way out to Kenner here. Couple of weak links, things that we, even in 2008, did not have. This didn't exist in 2008, and also here at the Seabrook Bridge, they have now got a giant surge gate and a small barrier structure that keeps Lake Pontchartrain out. So here is, we're essentially at the Mississippi River, flying down toward or down the Industrial Canal, over the bridges. Off to the right, you would see the 9th Ward where the levees broke in Katrina in 2005, and that structure sort of at the top of the screen is this, that's Lake Pontchartrain at the top of the screen, on our way to this giant surge gate structure. It looks a little bit different now than it did back when we shot this. This video's just getting a few months old now, but essentially the structure is there. So what it does is it keeps out Lake Pontchartrain as we go back to the map, because there were two routes in. If you remember those pictures of during Gustav, water coming over the brand new flood wall, and this is the, by the way, this is the trip we just took, coming from the waterway up toward the lake. If you remember water gushing over really both sides of that levee and the new flood wall in Gustav, that would not happen today because of this barrier here, and then especially the Great Wall, which keeps that from happening. Or as one of the engineers who built it said at the time, Gustav would bounce off of this system today. You would not see that kind of effect. There have been some concerns about corrosion. The Corps of Engineers will tell you that they didn't use small amounts of steel. There was some concern that they didn't essentially paint it or coat it. Some of these sheet piles that go into the earth, the Corps said they didn't need to because they used thicker steel, so they were essentially coating steel with steel. So there is 2 points there. There is some concern about whether the system was built to the standards. We haven't tested it yet. Hopefully this will not be the test. The Corps of Engineers stands by the work and insists that it is top-notch. Certainly never has there ever been anything built in the modern history, in the history of man, this large a system in that short a period of time. $14 billion or $10,000 for every man, woman, and child in metropolitan New Orleans on this new system.
And John, one other key point of that whole new system is the outfall canal, 17th Street to London, Orleans. You have the gates now, and you have
that's an excellent point. In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's see, got to get the parish line here. So here's the 17th Street. Here's the 17th Street Canal, London, the Orleans. Well, London is over here by UNO, and then Orleans and the 17th Street Canal along the Metairie line. I will tell you this, Lee, I went and did a story on the Florida Everglades years ago, and there was their water systems, sort of their sewerage and water board, and their levee boards are one. They call them the Florida, they have a number of them, but they call them their water districts. I talked to an engineer who came and advised New Orleans and was part of the recovery effort afterwards, and then one or two people down from him was still somebody who was fairly high up in the South Florida Water District, who was astonished that you had essentially something connected to the ocean without some way to block the lake from coming in. You can argue about whether they should put the pumps here, whether they should pump this way or whether they should pump that way, but there's just no disputing that you've got to have something here on these outfall canals to block Lake Pontchartrain from putting that pressure on these levees and then causing them to break. That was a key factor. So you could have had, theoretically, the same weak levees along these outfall canals 7 years ago, but if you had had a structure there, that might have been enough to provide an additional layer of defense that perhaps they wouldn't have gone. But I think that's an excellent point.
I guess maybe the point you're trying to make too is if you would have had those flood walls right there, or the gates there at the foot of the outfall canals, even if you would have had a flood wall failure, there would have only been a certain amount of water in the canal to go.
Absolutely, you would have you might have filled up the canal with rainwater, but you couldn't have dumped. We basically dumped Lake Pontchartrain into the city of New Orleans until the elevations got to the point where you had to get it all the way practically to the river or to the French Quarter area before the land was high enough that it wouldn't take any more water. If the French Quarter had been lower, more water would have poured in. 7 years ago, we invited the lake into the city by not putting up a front door, essentially. We've got a front door now.
All right.